Yes, the same kind of story that seems to come down from long ago. Two friends having coffee together when something flies by their window.
Hi, I'm John Cullen. Welcome to another episode of Is This News? In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at some of the stories in the headlines the last couple days. Right now, it is Thursday, May the 12th, 2022 in the USA, and it is Friday, May 13th in Asia, early in the morning. We're going to take a close look at things happening with coronavirus and a number of other things. This is not authoritative source, so if you're interested in authoritative data, go to the CDC or the WHO, or Pfizer, or Moderna, or one of the other authoritative sources. This is just commentary and opinion on some of the data and some of the stories in the news. By way of introduction, one of the founders of the geographic information systems, like the one that you see here being used to track the coronavirus. This is the Johns Hopkins system from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and the System Science and Engineering Department. This map was configured by En-Sheng Dong, a PhD working at Johns Hopkins. And what we see here is that as of May the 13th, 2022 at 3:20 a.m. in China, there are 572 people that have died with COVID in Shanghai, 572, and China, according to Johns Hopkins, has 14,559 people that have died total over the course of the pandemic from COVID-19. So that's the statistics coming out of China from Johns Hopkins. If we go to the WHO, the World Health Organization, they also publish a map here, and their map shows us 15,493 people have died in China. This is according to the World Health Organization, and we're on their website right now, World Health Organization. This is their emergency dashboard for COVID, and they're confirming 1.4 million cases, a little over 1.4 million, not quite 1.5 million cases in all of China over the course of the pandemic. This is from the World Health Organization. Interestingly, if we look at New Zealand right now, New Zealand has had 366 of their deaths in the last 28 days, and I'll show you sort of a data problem here. It says 366 in this little box, and up here it says 350. So this is Johns Hopkins kind of getting it wrong in one of these places because both answers can't be correct. So it says 28-day deaths, 350 in New Zealand. And when we go to New Zealand, we see slightly different information here. 350 versus 366. Total deaths in New Zealand, this says 863. This says 864. This is 367 in the last 28 days. But what's interesting is when you look over here on the right-hand side at this white chart, that's how many people have died in New Zealand. And it seems like most of the people have been dying recently. The peak was April the 3rd, 2022. And then here recently, this is May 8th of 2022. They had 99 people die. That's less than a week prior to me recording this. So it appears that in New Zealand, most of the people have been dying in the most recent time frame. Versus, a while ago back here, they had 4 people die, they had 6 people die, they had 3 people, 1 person. Relatively small numbers. Recently, 132 people died in a given week. So when we look at these charts and we see the number of cases in New Zealand and the number of people that have died recently, it's odd to read this in the headlines, that New Zealand is fully reopening to the world in August. Now, keep in mind, this is as of July 31st. I'm recording this May 12th, so May, June, and then the end of July. So we're looking at about 10 weeks from now. They'll be reopening to the world. And it just seems odd that you'd make that decision now when things are sort of as bad as they've been in quite some time, according to Johns Hopkins. So sometimes I don't understand these news stories. This is David Gilhooly, and he reported this Wednesday, May the 11th, 2022. And this is on Yahoo News, but he writes for the Associated Farm Press. And it says New Zealand will fully reopen to the world in August, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said on Wednesday, ending one of the toughest anti-COVID-19 border restrictions. Border safeguards will be lifted fully, and all pre-departure testing dropped from 11:59 p.m. on July 31st, with Ardern saying New Zealand is in demand and now fully open for business. So again, with this as your backdrop, the data sort of makes that decision a little bit odd again. Let's go on to the next story here. This is COVID-19 subvariant XE. What to know? Now, what's interesting is they haven't really talked about subvariant XE a whole lot. This story was published May 5th of 2022, about a week ago. And this is a story by Shiv Sudhakar at Fox News. Let's pull up Shiv real quick. Shiv Sudhakar. This is Shiv. And Shiv has written a whole bunch of stories here for Fox News. So that's the byline. COVID-19 subvariant XE, what to know? So far, there's not enough evidence to draw conclusions about transmissibility, severity, or vaccine effectiveness. It's nicknamed Frankenstein, but experts say that shouldn't scare you. The World Health Organization recently issued a preliminary report on the new COVID-19 Frankenstein subvariant called XE, which is a mix of the Omicron BA1 variant and the stealth variant BA2, with the agency declaring it's still part of the Omicron variant, but not a variant of interest or concern yet, according to a recent Euronews report. The XE strain was first detected in the United Kingdom on January 19th, with now over 1,000 cases spreading by community transmission, with the majority in the east of England, London, and southeast London, per the report. A recombinant strain is a type of variant that occurs when an individual becomes infected with 2 or more variants at the same time, and are assigned the letter X prefix to classify them as recombinant, said Dr. Stacia Wyman, senior genomics scientist at the Innovative Genomics Institute at UC Berkeley. Wyman noted the XE subvariant originated from someone who was infected with both the BA1 and BA2 variants. When the virus was replicating, there was an error, and the 2 viruses combined, she said. Then the combined virus replicates, and it is spread to other people. All right, so this conversation about this new variant called XE is odd because, we're seeing stories now. This is U.S. News and World Report. New Omicron subvariant spreading in U.S. as coronavirus cases increase. And this was dated May 2nd of 2022. So this is about 10 days ago. So they're talking about this She variant. And then when we look at the COVID data tracker, we see that they're tracking a number of different variants here. Hang on, they're updating. Okay, so we see a number of different Omicron variants here. Right, so you see BA2, you see the BA2.12, you see the BA1.1, and you see the B1.1.529. So they're tracking all this. Now, Delta is almost turned into yesterday's news, but let's take a closer look, though, at this She notion. So in the world of Greek alphabet letters and symbols, you've got, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, She, then Omicron. She comes before Omicron. So shouldn't we have had the She variant prior to the Omicron variant? Why would we now introduce a new variant that's prior to Omicron? That seems odd. We've talked about the Lambda variant in Peru and how we saw it in Peru and Chile, and they were having a real rough go of it. But it just seems odd that they would introduce this She nomenclature after Omicron. You would think that after Omicron they'd be talking about the Pi variant or the Rho variant or the Sigma variant. Why are they reluctant to go to Pi? Are they reluctant to go to Rho? Are they reluctant to go to Sigma, Tau? I don't know, and I don't know why that would be, but it just seems odd that they'd be taking a step backwards. All right, this is a story I wanted to talk about. This was published a while ago. This was February 22nd of 2022. So February 22nd, February, March, April, and now May. So this was about 10 weeks ago, and this is an interesting story, I think, in that it's published by the New York Post. The source of the story is Emily Crane, is the author. And the New York Post published this, and it says the CDC withholding COVID data over fears of misinterpretation. So there's a little video clip here that I'll run this in a second, but let's just take a look at the first sentence or two. The CDC has admitted it is withholding large portions of COVID-19 data, including on vaccine boosters, from the public because it fears the information could be misinterpreted. The leading public health agency has only published a small sample of the data it's been collecting, despite being 2 years into the pandemic, sources told the New York Times. So it sounds like the New York Times was the original source of this story, so let's pop that open and we'll take a peek at that if they'll let me. Kristen Nordlund, the CDC spokeswoman, said the reason for the slow release of data is because basically, at the end of the day, it's not yet ready for prime time. She added that the CDC's priority when gathering any data is to ensure that it's accurate and actionable. But another reason is that the data could be misinterpreted by the public, Nordlund admitted. Among the data that has been collected but not made public is hospitalizations broken down by age, race, and vaccination status over the last year, and information on the effectiveness of booster shots. When the CDC released data on the effectiveness of boosters for adults younger than 65 2 weeks ago, it did not include full numbers on those between 18 and 49. That data showed the booster shots were least likely to benefit younger adults because 2 shots of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson already left them well protected. The CDC has also just started releasing data on whether COVID is present in wastewater, even though some states have been providing figures since the beginning of the pandemic. Wastewater data can help public health officials predict whether there will be an influx of COVID-19 cases. According to one CDC official, Dr. Daniel Jernigan, the COVID pandemic has revealed how outdated the agency and other state-level health systems had become. All right, so this is a story in the New York Post, sourced from the New York Times, about withholding data over fears of misinterpretation. It seems we have a little audio clip, a video clip here. Let me see if I can get this to run and see if I can share this with you guys.
The CDC has collected stockpiles of critical data on COVID hospitalizations and booster shots, but most of that information has not been made public. That's according to a report from the New York Times. Specifically, the CDC has yet to publish its data on hospitalizations, broken down by age, race, and vaccination status. The agency also has not released information about the effectiveness of boosters in adults under 50. A spokeswoman for the CDC told The Times the agency has been reluctant to release certain data because they fear it could be misinterpreted. Dr. Nahid Badalia, now founding director at the Boston University Center for Emerging Infectious Diseases Policy and Research. She's also an NBC News medical contributor. Doctor, good to see you again, and help us understand how this data would be helpful to local officials.
Yeah, Kelly, I think having timely data in a pandemic allows states, cities to make timely information and policy, right? To say which population is at risk, which population could use a booster more quickly, who should we target? But I think here the issue is twofold. One is that we have an underfunded and outdated public health data system, and a problem that was preceded the pandemic. And the pandemic has only exacerbated it because the CDC needs to take the slow-moving collection at the hospital levels, at the state levels, collate it, collect it, make sure it's accurate, and then interpret it. All of that takes time, right? So the second issue is that what they've said is that they want to make sure that this is ready for prime time. They don't want to share it, given that there's so much misinformation before it's ready out there, so that it could potentially cause confusion. But if that's the case, we're creating a void, right? And that data void actually makes the trust in the public health system fade even more. And what I would suggest is that if those are resources that are missing to get the CDC to be quickly able to translate all the data it currently has, to be able to quickly interpret it and present it, then we need to invest in that particular resources to be able to do that, because without that, we are always flying blind. We are always reacting rather than being proactive.
This was on CNBC, and they're talking about the CDC withholding data because people might misinterpret it. And that's one of the reasons on this show we just go straight to the CDC and use their data most of the time when I'm talking about deaths. Otherwise, we're using the Johns Hopkins map, right? So we use the Johns Hopkins official map, and this is the system from ESRI that I helped put together many, many years ago. Or we're going directly to the WHO, to the World Health Organization, and looking at their data and their maps. So we're using their official stuff, but this is not an official channel. So do not take anything we say here. This is not information. This is entertainment. So let's continue. So we've got this subvariant, the she, which is again strange because some places they talk about, some places they don't. And in the alphabet, it comes later. The other thing is, I saw a quote from Dr. Redfield saying that we're going to have to live with COVID for a very long time. And I found that odd because that's not what happened with the other coronaviruses. That's not what happened with SARS. It says here in June of 2003, the incidence, 8,469 cases. No cases of SARS have been reported worldwide since 2004. So 18 years, and there haven't been any more SARS-CoV-1 cases. So why is everybody jumping to the conclusion that this SARS-CoV-2 is going to just be endemic forever when the first one wasn't? I don't understand that. It would be nice if somebody would explain that and explain why. Why is SARS-CoV-2 so different from SARS-CoV-1, since the first one I don't think killed 1,000 people globally. Let's see, cases, deaths. 782 people died from SARS-CoV-1 and 8,096 cases total in the world, and we haven't seen another case since 2004. So why do we believe SARS-CoV-2 will be endemic? Maybe it just will go away like this one did. Then we look at MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And according to the CDC, MERS, which was the other big coronavirus outbreak in the USA, it says information about the MERS situation in the US and about the 2 imported cases confirmed in the US in May of 2014. So when you read about MERS and you find out that 2012 in Saudi Arabia and how many people died from MERS, it turns out there were only 2 cases in the United States in May of 2014. So again, why would we expect this other behavior? So we just looked at this story about the CDC withholding data. And then this is the original story from the New York Times. They want me to log in and give them 50 cents. The CDC isn't publishing large portions of the COVID data it collects, according to the New York Times. And if you guys are members, you can read the rest of that story. Next topic, Anthony Fauci rails against the normalization of untruths in a commencement speech. This is a story by Hannah Blau at Breitbart, and this was published May 9th, a few days ago. And Hannah writes, Dr. Anthony Fauci, a serial flip-flopper in the era of Chinese coronavirus, railed against the normalization of untruths in so-called news organizations during his commencement speech at the University of Michigan over the weekend. Being in Washington has allowed me to experience firsthand the intensity of the divisiveness in our nation, Fauci told the graduates during the roughly 15-minute speech. What troubles me is that differences of opinion or ideology have in certain circumstances been reflected by egregious distortions of reality, he said. So there we go. And this is a story here about Anthony Fauci, and I think he said that they need more money in order to solve COVID. All right, another interesting story here. This is from Vice, and this is from Rachel Chung at Vice, and this was published May 11th, 2022. The WHO chief, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, has been censored in China after calling its zero COVID policy unsustainable. Top Chinese officials recently vowed to silence those who cast doubts on the country's approach to managing the pandemic. China's zero-tolerance mindset to COVID-19 appears to be extending to even just criticism of its pandemic policy, signaling the country's intent to uphold some of the world's harshest measures to contain the coronavirus despite growing economic and social costs. Video clips of WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus' Tuesday's remarks calling for a change in strategy have been largely scrubbed off the Chinese internet. Screenshots of foreign media reports and his comments were also blocked on Chinese social media. When we talk about the zero COVID strategy, we don't think that it's sustainable, considering the behavior of the virus now and what we anticipate in the future, Tedros said in a press briefing on Tuesday. Let's see if we can pop that open. This is the Tedros Adhanom press briefing. Oh, and this Google wants to know, YouTube, a Google company, wants to talk about cookies. So I'm going to reject all cookies.
Save lives, protect communities and health systems, and minimize cases of post-COVID-19 condition or long COVID.
All right. So we've got that fascinating video with Tedros. So he got himself in trouble with China, and now they are censoring him and no longer paying any attention to him. So I thought that was an interesting little topic here. This is a document, the coronavirushouse.gov, coronavirus vaccine manufacturing failures of emergent biosolutions staff report, May 2022. This is a report prepared for Rep. Carolyn Maloney, Chairwoman of the Oversight and Reform, and Representative James Clyburn, Chairman of the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus Crisis. And this is an investigation into an award of a multi-million-dollar contract to Emergent Biosolutions. And it turned out that 400 million doses of vaccines have been destroyed as a result of their failure to meet or maintain quality standards. So it seems that there's a bit of a controversy here with a company called Emergent Biosolutions. And this is being looked at by the Congress, and there's a whole bunch of interesting documents here. And it turns out that they're manufacturing certain batches for Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. So there's like contract work in the pharmaceutical industry. So even Johnson & Johnson has manufacturers that make portions of the things they do or the thing itself. And in this case, it seems there's quite a bit of controversy. So this is the Emergent Biosolutions Staff Report, May 2022. And this is something you might expect to hear a little bit more about. Also, Bill Gates has COVID and a plan to end pandemics, which is great. So the fact that he's vaccinated and boosted and has COVID, I sure hope I don't get polio. That's all I can say. But he said that he's going to he said, Bill Gates saying that we must make this the decade of vaccines. Let me repeat that. Bill Gates says we must make this the decade of vaccines. And he said he's going to commit $10 billion over the next 10 years to foster research and deliver vaccines for the world's poorest countries. So that's what Bill Gates has to say. Also, we have New York Governor Kathy Hochul testing positive for COVID-19. And she's got her little card that she reads from that says, "Thankfully, I'm vaccinated and boosted, and I'm asymptomatic. I'll be isolating and working remotely this week," Hochul tweeted. So we've seen a number of big names that have been fully vaccinated, boosted, and have still contracted the virus. The governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. We saw Jen Psaki. She contracted the virus. We saw Nancy Pelosi. She contracted the virus. So we see a lot of that. Let's see. Last Friday, Jason and I talked about this just a little bit here. The story is covered by the Wall Street Journal. The FDA is limiting the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, so they're kind of reeling it in a little bit, it seems. Agency makes the change after confirming 9 deaths tied to a clotting condition among those who received the 1-dose shot. So it seems that there's some risks associated with the J&J COVID-19 vaccine that maybe the FDA wasn't aware of earlier that are starting to rear their head. And this is covered by the Wall Street Journal. Here's an interesting story. This is, let's see, from Vice Motherboard. So Motherboard's sort of like a little offshoot of Vice. And this is their tech pages. It's called Motherboard. CDC tracked millions of phones to see if Americans followed COVID lockdown orders. Newly released documents showed the CDC planned to use phone location data to monitor schools and churches and wanted to use the data for many non-COVID-19 purposes too. This is a story by Joseph Cox, and he published this May 3rd of 2022. And again, this is at vice.com. And just thought you guys would like to see this and know who's watching whom, right? So the CDC is tracking your phone to find out if you're staying put or not. And location data, right, is something we've been talking about here on the show for quite some time. Let's see, the documents reveal the expansive plan the CDC had last year to use location data from a highly controversial data broker, SafeGraph. The company the CDC paid $420,000 for access to 1 year of data includes Peter Thiel and the former head of Saudi intelligence among its investors. Google banned the company from the Play Store in June. So, thought you guys would enjoy that. That's always fun to learn about. And then we'll wrap up with this story. The law inviting Texans to sue social media companies over censorship is back. So if you are canceled by a social media company, this law in Texas, HB 20, allows you to sue the company. And this law had been sort of put on ice for a while, but now it's back. And I think you might see a lot of people moving to Texas in order to gain this type of protection. So we know that Joe Rogan's already there. We know Alex Jones is already there. I wonder if you might see more people like me and maybe Jason start heading towards Texas so that we can take a stand against some of the censorship. My name is John Cullen. Thanks for joining.
Yes, the same kind of story that seems to come down from long ago. Two friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. It might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Your body needs nothing, you'll get hypnotized. Now it's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange pond. You see, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like a dream. They got me hypnotized. And I know that's right.